So I'm here with Keith Gregoire and Joanne Hagemeyer. I'm Bruce Fleming. We're doing a little after show here, and we're doing a little Bible study. Maybe Keith, you have some insights on some of these passages, or you have some questions on some of these passages that they call the clobber verses.
Oh, I mean, yeah, I've got all kinds. The one that I think is it's been the biggest change in my life personally, that I've seen is how we interpret the verse where it says God made a helper suitable for him.
Mhm.
Because the way that we translate it in English is, very much a helper in English sounds like a subordinate,
Yep.
and suitable
Mhm.
means like he's really the center of the story, and this is supposed to match him. Um,
Mhm.
but that's not what the Hebrew says, from my understanding. Now, I've studied a bit of Greek, but I haven't studied Hebrew, and I will admit that. But from what my understanding is, the word is Ezer Kenegdo in Hebrew, and the Ezer means help, but it's not an assistant. It's the word Ezer is used for God, like God is our help,
Yep.
right? So it's not a subordinate in any way. It's like another way of word is like a power, strength, that sort of thing, rather than a helper. And the Kenegdo means like sort of like commensurate with or equal to,
Mhm.
or that sort of thing.
Mhm.
So an Ezer Kenegdo is like a power, corresponding to him,
Right.
is the way I've heard it
Mhm.
translated. And I think you might have used a similar language in your books. Am I
Yeah,
right?
we just to simplify it in junior high English, we say equal partners.
Yeah.
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 Hmm.
And so to me, that is a really amazing truth, because a lot of people teach the creation story like God made man, and that was the plan all along. He made a masculine human, and then he went,
Mhm.
"Oops, this doesn't work. I'll make a woman to like join to him, and that'll fix the thing." It's like I made this thing, but it's really not complete yet. I guess I got to finish it off with a woman,
Hmm.
and that's a terrible way. I mean, if you look at Genesis 1, in the image of God created he them, male and female created he them, right? Like the plan all along was man and woman.
Yeah.
Like
Mhm.
the second chapter story is not a different story. It's like the plan all along was man and woman.
Yep.
So if you start thinking that this is a helper that's supposed to be part of the main message, which is the main story is the guy and she's just his helper, you didn't read chapter one. Like
Mhm.
you're not using the Bible to give you the interpretation of this chapter. You're using your preconceived sexist notions about what it means to be a helper. And so to me personally in my life, um, I there was a phase where I went through where I was taught actively that to be a good husband, you need to be the leader. And if you are not the leader, you are abdicating your God-given role in the marriage, and you will not be blessed, because that's not what God intended. God intended the man to lead and the woman to submit to him. And if you don't live that kind of a life, you will not receive God's blessing in your marriage. And I was taught this, and I was taught that anybody who teaches you different than that is just not biblical, and they just don't believe the Bible. And so, I never got domineering or aggressive or that sort of stuff. But the fact that I was being taught that was what the way a husband was supposed to be colored the way I interact with my wife.
Wow.
And in
Mhm.
every single instance, it was bad. It did not
Mhm.
bring any blessing to our marriage.
Oh, oh.
When you read our books, you'll see that, we talk pretty bluntly in the Good Guys Guide about some of the ways that I messed up in our sexual relationship early on. And a lot of it was because I had an entitled mindset, because I had
Mhm.
bought into this kind of garbage, instead of seeing her as my Ezer Kenegdo,
Mhm.
my equal partner in your terminology, right? The person who was, corresponding to me, not less important than me,
Oh.
not more important than me, but equal with me, and the two of us were to work together. And so as I've incorporated the idea that she's my Ezer Kenegdo rather than my trusty sidekick, our marriage has flourished. And I see that
Yeah.
happening all over the place. I mean, it only makes sense.
So in
Yeah.
they've got a couple of problems. They misunderstand Ephesians. They think
Mhm.
that the husband is like Christ, and that's not what's going on in Ephesians 5 and 6. And
Yeah.
then they talk about order of creation. or they come up with so like in 1 Corinthians 11, for example, when I think Paul quotes the bad guys and then he refutes them.
Yep.
And he says, yeah, the man is the image and glory of God. All right, that's fine, and then people go, and then he says, and she is the glory of the man. I'm thinking, well, she's the image and glory of God too. Plus, three. She's got three good reasons now, and she's the glory of the man. And yet the logic, the people flip it on its head and they make it out as though, no, she's only the glory of the man. Like she's not the image of God. Go back to Genesis 1. She is the image of God. Yeah. So they should start suspecting that they're interpreting wrong if they're denying the image of God in the woman.
Well, absolutely. And it's just totally inconsistent. Because, like, as I said, people teach you don't believe the Bible unless you believe in hierarchy. That's just, they just say that you don't believe the Bible. Right. But then, okay, here's the deal. So you read the creation story, and the creation story shows that Adam is the last thing created after all the animals, and therefore God has made the man above everything else on earth. And then God creates the woman after the man, and she's supposed to be under the man. So it's like, so when it suits your narrative that the order of creation matters to show authority, you use it. But the minute it doesn't, you jettison it.
Yeah.
And you completely interpret the verse totally differently, because otherwise this would mean the woman was supposed to be superior to the man.
Yeah.
Right. So, and you can't do that because the woman has to be inferior. So you're starting with the assumption that the woman is inferior, and you're finding it in the Bible. And then you're saying the Bible teaches that the woman is inferior to the man. I mean, it's crazy, because you're right. Because people teach it like the woman is the glory of man. It's like the man is the image of God, and it's like a copy of a copy. You know what I mean? Like he's not quite God, but he's pretty close. And she's kind of like even less than him. Like it's a copy of a copy sort of thing. Yeah. But the way the creation story works is it's like glory upon glory upon glory, with increasing glory, finally ending in the woman. Right. Yeah. So it's like, you can't say it means one thing here, one thing, and another thing over there, unless you have a preconceived idea that you're trying to prove from the Bible, rather than letting the Bible speak to what it actually says.
Now, my Old Testament half would say, finally arriving at the two. she won't say the woman was the higher, because he created the two on day 6.
Yes. So and that's what I believe too, obviously.
Yeah, I knew that was. Yeah. So Joanne, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, one of the things that I really learned early on working with Bruce and with Joy is that if you read the Bible forwards as it's delivered to us, and you stop at the end of Genesis 2, then Genesis 1 informs Genesis 2. As opposed to reading the Bible backwards and deciding that Genesis 3 informs Genesis 2. So when you only have those two chapters together, 1 and 2 together, this is our pre-fall material, then a lot of things change. Because how do you find out about the woman? Who is she? Well, you have to you go back to chapter 1. It's the only place you can go. And then you wonder, well, who has authority to do what? And you notice that in chapter 1, when God creates the sun, moon, and stars, God gives them the authority to do certain things. And then you note, God hasn't given them authority to do other things. For example, they signal the seasons, but they don't rule over human beings. And we can know that, right, from chapter 1. So then we ask ourselves, well, what authority do the men and the women have? Well, the only place we can go is back to chapter 1, in which they're both given equal authority. And so when I started doing that exercise, just going back between 1 and 2, I got a completely different story than what I got if I went backwards through the Bible. And it even has a name, eisegesis, right?
Yep.
Instead of exegesis. And boy, did that ever open my eyes. And I'm thankful to that first book for just that one piece. Changed a lot for me.
Joanne worked on the Book of Eden. She put the study guides together.
Oh,
so you'll see that, she'll see her handiwork throughout all of that. Yeah. She helped.
Yeah. The big thing for me is just anytime anyone says to you, the Bible is clear that men are supposed to be over women, and anyone who says anything different is reading their views into the Bible. And it's like, you are like, we've talked about this podcast already and you've shown your books. No, you're reading your view into the Bible and you're just not self-aware enough to realize that's what you're doing.
Mhm.
Except in Genesis 3:16, because in
Yes.
Africa, words mean things and things mean things. So they say if God cursed the woman with pain in childbirth, then she must have been a stinker and she must have been a temptress along with Satan. And therefore, we got to watch out for her back then and we got to watch out for her now. And so why we're trying to true the verse, and we're not claiming we're true. It's like you're riding your bicycle and you bump into a log and you warp the wheel and you barely wobble home. And then you take out the tool and you take all the spokes and you true the wheel, you true it up. We're just trying to say, let's true up Genesis 3:16 according to the Hebrew words, and don't make it look like God cursed her, but make it clear that God said something about her relationship to the sorrowful toil because of the curse on the ground and her relationship to the seed who will crush Satan's head. That's what's in Genesis 3:16 line A. Because in Africa, we watched it. I kept watching it because they thought one thing about 3:16, then they misinterpreted Ezer Kenegdo back in chapter 2.
Yeah.
And they couldn't pay attention to chapter 1. So we're just hoping that we can true this verse. We can get the word out.
I think it's great because, I mean, outside and forget Africa. I mean, sorry, not forget Africa, but like, it's not just Africa. What I mean is it's not just Africa. I mean, look at all of human history, right? The number of Western, European scholars who have basically said that Eve was the downfall. Eve was the cause. Women, we can't trust women. Women are more easily deceived. Look what happened with the serpent. That sort of rhetoric has been all through our history. And no one at any point in all those centuries said, well, then why does Paul talk so much about the sin of Adam? Like, it's all through the New Testament. When Paul talks about, the sin that happened in the garden, he talks about the sin of Adam. But all we're talking about is the sin of Eve. Like, how do we not know we were off base? Doesn't make any sense. So it's good.
Let's compare sins, just being deceived or being an active rebel.
Yeah, exactly. So
That's
it's good that you're going back and sorting that out, because women are being kind of blamed. Well, I mean, that started in Genesis 3, the woman you gave me, and unfortunately, men have been continuing to blame Eve ever since. So it's nice that you're trying to set the record straight.
Yeah, we're working at it, and you're part of this show. So I appreciate that very much, Keith. I really do.